I was making the video about governesses a few weeks ago and finding out how little they could earn. It got me thinking about how much the cost of living was in the time of the Brontë family. So today's video, I'm going to look into how much Patrick earned, what it cost to run the household, and how much everyday items would have cost. Maybe I'm just a little bit nosy, or maybe I want to better understand how it would have been for Patrick having to provide for 7 people in one house on a clergyman's wage. I'm including Charlotte, Bramwell, Emily, Anne, Tabby and Martha the servants, plus Aunt Bramwell, but we need to look into her a bit further, so let's get into this. So firstly, we need to look at money. In the 19th century and right through to 1971, Britain had a slightly complicated currency system, and this is how it worked. You had pound, shilling and pence, but pence was often pronounced punts. Don't ask me why, it's just something that's happened over years. The pound symbol was used for pounds, easy. The S was used for shillings, also easy. But then it gets a little bit difficult. D symbol for pence. This was because the Latin word for this coin was denarius. D. Simple. You have £1 was divided into 20 shillings. 1 shilling was divided into 12 pennies. 1 penny was divided into 2 halfpennies, or 4 farthings. But we're not going to get into farthings and guineas, so let's just keep this simple. So for example, if someone had, say, 3 shillings and 6pence, you would write it 3s 6d. Or if something was £1 4 shillings and 9pence, you would write it £1 symbol 4s 9d. Not as easy as money is nowadays. So let's look at Patrick. As he was a perpetual curate at Haworth, his income was modest, and according to historical records, his salary was around about £200 per year in the 1820s to 1830s, and by the 1850s he might have earned about £200 to £300, which was enough to live on modestly, but not in luxury. In today's money, that's about £25,000 to £30,000 a year. And then of course we have Aunt Bramwell, who also had an income, and we can assume she paid into the family pot every week. This income came from investments and money she was left by family members. And whilst we don't know exact figures, we can estimate based on historical accounts, and she likely had around £50 to £100 a year. In today's money, we're looking at £12,000 to £25,000 a year. It's not bad. So let's break it down into weekly earnings. Okay, Patrick had £3 17 shillings per week from his wages. Not too bad. Aunt Bramwell, based on the higher figure of £100 a year, because it's easier to work out, she would have £1 18 shillings a week. If Aunt Bramwell gave, say, £1 a week to Patrick and he had £3 17 shillings, then we have a total income for the week of £4 and 17 shillings. Are you all with me? I do feel like a teacher explaining a maths problem here. So let's look at how much things cost. It gives us a better idea of understanding what life would have been like in, say, 1840s. That's what we're looking at. So milk, a quart of milk, which is a quarter of a gallon, which is equivalent to 2 pints, in 1840 was about 3p. So not too bad considering, so it meant you could have plenty of cups of tea. Tea, though, was a luxury. And you bought it based on a pound of weight. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about is based on a pound of weight. So you would obviously buy tea leaves, not like nowadays with tea bags. And that cost for a pound in weight between 5 and 6 shillings. And this would probably last a few months, unless you were me, and then it probably only last a few weeks. So meat, beef, mutton, pork, that sort of thing, was between 6 and 8p per pound in weight. Obviously mutton was more common up in Yorkshire because we farm a lot of sheep up here, and pork, people kept their own pigs and obviously would sell off any surplus. Beef was a bit more of a luxury and probably was the higher end of the 8p. Flour for bread, which was essential. We know the Brontes made their own bread, so they would have definitely been buying this in. And you would pay 2p per pound of weight. Sugar was another luxury, but it was essential. It was used in tea, it was used in cooking, and like nowadays, we do like a bit of sugar. So this was about 6p per pound, but prices varied. Candles, essential for the Bronte household, and any household really, especially in winter when it got dark so early here in Yorkshire. But you bought it in weight because, of course, when they're made, they couldn't have been accurate like they are now with machines. You would buy pound in weight worth of candles. So that would be anything between 6p and 1 shilling, depending on whether you had tallow or wax. Tallow was very smelly and was made of animal fat, so your whole house would stink. Wax, normal beeswax, was obviously much more expensive. And then we've got soap, but this was for laundry. We're not talking face soap here, we're talking laundry washing and general cleaning. The same soap you put in your wash you would use to scrub your floors, called hard soap. About 3.5p per pound in weight again, but it was needed. You had to wash things. So coal was about 10 to 12 shillings per tonne, but it depended on the time of year and how much you would use, obviously. Colder months you would get through it a lot quicker. You might use wood to supplement, but again, wood wouldn't burn so hot, so you'd probably likely use coal. A tonne would last a week in a smallish house. Maybe for the parsonage being that much bigger, you might get through half that, but then they might have only lit fires in, say, 2 or 3 rooms. So beer, again, was essential really in Haworth when you think about it, because the water was so bad. At least you could have beer and know that you weren't going to probably die of something nasty from the graveyard. And the crazy thing is, beer was cheaper than tea and wine. You know, that's the way it was. You would pay for a quart, again, which is 2 pints. So each serving would be about 2 pints, but whether it would come in a jug and you would tip it and do it that way. So don't imagine you've got these huge 2-pint glasses that you're swigging down. And that would cost you 1.5p. So, you know, if it's a choice between manky water and ending up sick or dead, or a pint of ale, yeah, I'm probably going to pick the ale as well. And then we need to look at Tabby and Martha's wages, because the Bronte had servants. The servants typically earned in this time in history between 10 and 15 pounds a year, and this was as well as having a room and board, so I mean room and food. Your meals would be provided, and I think Tabby would have been closer to the 12 to 15 pounds, being that much older and obviously been there longer, and Martha probably more around about the £10 a year during this time period we're looking at. So I've made a guess at their spendings based on essentials for this week to give us an idea of how things were. So I'm going to put up a little table showing you how much I think everything would have cost. But in summary, we've included food, coal, household items like soap and, you know, cleaning products and things. A few essentials that are not quite essential, things like clothes and boots, but then essential to the Brontes, which would have been writing materials and books and things. So the total weekly outgoing would have been £2 2 shillings to about £2 15 shillings, depending on the time of year, the price of things, you know, the various prices going up and down. So that gives us a rough idea. So I've included a few luxuries in my weekly essential list because I believe it really was essential for the whole family to have writing materials and books, etc. So let's look at that. Paper. You'd buy a quire of paper, which is 24 sheets of paper, and that costs between 6p and 1 shilling per quire. Again, depends on the cost of things. I suppose a bit like nowadays, not everything's the same every week, is it? Books. Again, this was a real luxury, and it depends on the size, on the binding, if it was multiple volumes, if it was second-hand. But a typical novel might have cost between, I don't know, 7, 8 shillings, or much more, could even go into the pound. So they were very much a luxury. And then you might have one-off purchases, like a good pair of boots. They could cost anything between 6 to 10 shillings. But if you went for a high-quality boot, it could cost you 15 shillings. And again, we've got multiple people living in this house. There's only so many hand-me-downs you can do. And then there's the other costs. Health, for instance. The doctor would charge for a home visit anything between 5 to 10 shillings. And of course, this wasn't including any medicine either. And we know all the Brontes suffered at one point or another with something. So you had to bear this cost in mind when looking at your weekly money. You never know when you might need to call the doctor. And then of course, we've got charities and donations. Patrick was known for his charitable work. Did he pay into a charity? Can we assume that he would give money to the poor? We don't know for sure. And of course, schooling. We know how well that went. When the sisters were at school, this would have been a big commitment, a big financial commitment for Patrick. We're talking about £15 to £20 a year, and these were the cheap clergy daughter schools as well. And actually, it was the school that killed 2 of his children. So finally, I haven't even touched on Bramwell's addiction and the financial cost it would have had on the family. But it was there, and we can't forget that when we're looking at how much they had by the end of the week. So Patrick may have had about £2, £2 15 shillings at the end of each week. But we have to consider the doctor, a bad week, an expensive week, or just a really bad week for poor Bramwell. And the money is soon gone. And of course, later on, there was more money coming into the house. We know Charlotte earned her own money when Jane Eyre became published, so let's look into that. The first edition of Jane Eyre sold for £1, 11 shillings and 6p. And Charlotte earned about £500 from the book's initial success, a substantial amount when you compare it to Patrick's annual salary of £200. This was roughly equivalent of today, in today's money, of £60,000 to £80,000. I mean, that is a huge amount. This gave her and the family, well, what was left of the family by then, freedom to have luxuries, and Charlotte paid for improvements at the parsonage, more clothes, and no doubt better food and supplies. And hopefully, no more smelly candles. Charlotte was a big letter writer, and I didn't want to forget about the cost of postage, because this is actually quite interesting. So before 1840, so before the Union penny postage came in, postage varied a lot, between 4p and 12 pence, which is a shilling. But depending on the distance, the letter has to go. But then after 1840, which was after the penny postage reform, the penny post was introduced, and it meant sending a standard letter anywhere in the UK was for 1 pence. What a brilliant idea. And this was regardless of the distance as well. So this made letter writing much more popular and cheaper. And of course, for people like Charlotte who likes to write, it was brilliant. So the penny black stamp, which is obviously very famous because it's, been seen everywhere, was the first adhesive postage stamp, and it marked the beginning of this standard postage rate. The reform likely made it easier for Charlotte to maintain a frequent correspondence, which she needed to do now that she was a published writer. So it came at just the right time. We know Charlotte loved to visit her friends, and therefore she used to travel quite a lot. But travelling by coach was quite expensive. It would cost you between 1 and 2 shillings per mile, which would soon add up over a long distance. When train travel became more popular, it was much cheaper and faster, of course. But of course, you still had to get to Keighley to be able to catch the train to wherever you wanted to go. So that would involve a carriage ride or a long walk. And of course, by now, Charlotte could afford it. Brilliant. So let's compare the Brontes' earnings to what the regular person in Haworth would have earned. So the wool industry was the main source of employment for many in Haworth during the Brontes' time. Woolcombers in particular. They would prepare the wool for spinning and weaving, and here's an estimate of their wages. So in 1840, woolcombers would expect to earn about 12 shillings to 20 shillings per week, depending on their skill level and the demand for wool. A skilled woolcomber might earn close to the upper end of this range, say 18 to 20 shillings a week. But unskilled workers, or those doing simpler tasks like spinning, could earn as little as 8 to 12 shillings per week. But we must remember, woolcombing earned more than domestic servants, but their work was grueling and the conditions were pretty unhealthy. And work really did depend on the fluctuating demand for wool. So you could never guarantee what you were earning from one day to the next. So what's my conclusion? Well, while the Brontë family wasn't as poor as many of the neighbours in Haworth, they were certainly careful with their money. They were never going to be wealthy, but a clergyman knew that when he went into the industry. So Patrick was aware having a large family and being a curate was never going to make him rich. And of course, nowadays, when you look at our bank statements, you've got Netflix subscriptions and you've got petrol costs and you've got going out with seeing your friends costs and mobile phone costs. It's crazy when you compare it to the Brontes going, oh, can I afford food? Can I afford coal? Am I waffling? I've gone for a waffle. Good old Kate, gone for a waffle. Do I need to keep saying wait? Maybe I need to do that. Wait. Money. Wait. Anyway. Slow down, Kate. Slow down. Stop talking so fast. Breathe. Conclusion. Thank you for watching today's video. I hope it gave you an idea of what it would have been like for the Brontes and everyone else that lived in the parsonage. I've gathered as much information as I can to make this video, and I've tried as hard as I can to be as accurate, but obviously I'm limited to what's out there, so any mistakes are my own. It really is just a guesstimate to give us an idea of what it would have been like. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do that whole likey, subscribey thing, because it really does help me out and it lets YouTube know that we want to watch more Brontë content. Hopefully I'll be out and about again soon, now that the summer school holidays here in the UK are starting to come to an end. And I will take you with me, of course. But until then, I will see you next Friday for more Brontë adventures. Thanks for joining me. Bye!